Today we're going to talk about something that I am super excited about, and if you are new to Journey, I'm going to go rewind the tape just a bit to catch you up to speed on who you walked in on today. Back in 2006, our church kind of shifted focuses and directions, and we started thinking about the future. We started thinking about what kind of church 5-10 years down the road do we want to be, and so we kind of had this picture of our preferred future. And we said this at the very beginning of all of those statements. We believe that God is calling us to have a positive impact within our community and around the world, and we are committed to clearly communicating the love and grace of God to everyone we meet. It was all about God's grace. It was good news, and so we wanted to have a positive impact. And then we kind of broke that general thing down, and we said things like this. We will be a place where no one stands alone because we are all connected to a small group. We think that life ought to be lived in community and that everybody who is a part of our church should be in a small group of some kind. We call those community groups. They meet in homes all over the city. And so that's pretty much true today. We want to be a place where no one is standing alone. You don't have to go through life alone. Another thing that we said was simply this. We want to be a refuge for families as we partner with parents as a resource in helping them raise children who grow to love God and honor Him with their lives. And so it's a partnership. We're not trying to raise anybody's kids, but we want to be a resource as best as we can. And so we've just got a fantastic children and student ministry from birth to college age. And so we're really thankful for that today. Another statement that we made. We will be a safe place for people to seek and discover the truth of Christianity and a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. We understand that not everybody believes what we believe. We understand that not everybody believes the Bible, that not everybody believes that God exists, and that's okay. We're okay with that. We can be a place where people who don't believe can belong as they seek to discover. And so we've got an environment here where it's all right if you don't believe what we believe, but we're just going to keep on teaching and preaching and having conversations, hopefully, that will be helpful to those who don't believe, who have doubts about faith. And so this is a safe place. Another thing that we said, we will be a place where we're focused on serving the real and spiritual needs of those in our community. It is not about us, it's about people who are in our community. That is what we're all about. If we just retreat to a holy huddle, we're no good to anybody. And so we had to keep a forward, outward focus where we're serving people around us in our community. And we also said this. We will be a church who makes a strategic impact in the world through our global compassion partnerships. That we want to unleash compassion on places in the world and people groups in the world who need the hope of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so we partner with different groups and missionaries as we unleash compassion in our world. And then we said this. We will be a church of financial generosity as we honor God and bless others through our tithes and our offerings. That we wanted to be a place, a church that is generous in every way as we honor God. And not only do we honor God with what we give, but we are blessing others, the people who are around us. And I want you to know, if you're new to this church, if you just came here for the first time today, I want you to know, you're sitting around some generous people. This is a generous church, and I'm so thankful to be a part of a generous church. You say, well, Jay, yeah, you can clap for that. Thank you very much. How do I know we're a generous church? Am I just saying that? Am I just saying, hey, yeah, we're a generous church? Woo-hoo. No. I'm saying that because since 2014, our church has given away over $1 million to people and organizations in our community. That's why I say that. We partner with local organizations. Some of you in this room have come on hard times and you've turned to the church and we've helped you through those hard times. There are other people that you'll never know and that we'll never know, but we have helped them through difficult times. We support organizations in our community. We support organizations in our world where we take money, serious amounts of money, and we give it away to help those in need. I am thankful to be a part of a generous church. I don't want to be a part of a church that's stingy And this is not a stingy church. And I am so thankful to be a part of that with you, which brings me to what I want to talk about today. And I announced this a couple weeks ago, but I want to bring it back up today. At the end of every year, there's a swell of generosity. We come out of Thanksgiving and we go into Christmas time, and people are buying gifts and receiving gifts, and it's just a very generous time. And also, people are generous towards churches and nonprofit organizations. And so this year, as in every year, we kind of have a bump in towards our year-end giving. But this year we wanted to get really focused, and we wanted to actually do an initiative, a generosity initiative. And so we're going to do a generosity initiative as we come to the end of the year, and our goal is to raise $200,000 above our normal giving to give every penny of that away to other organizations. All right? That's a big deal. And I am super excited about it. And you may think, James, how in the world are we going to do that? That's like $50,000 a week over the next few weeks. I know. And here's the thing. We can do this. Would you like to know where the money's going to go? All right. I thought you might say that. And therefore, I'm going to tell you, but not right now. I'm going to take you to a passage of Scripture that the Apostle Paul wrote to a church in the city of Corinth. And I'm going to give you the little background on this. Paul was traveling around, he was planting churches, and the Christians in the city of Jerusalem had fallen on hard times because as a result of following Jesus, they had been, basically cast out of the local synagogue. They had been fired from their jobs because the Jews didn't want Christians working for them, because they believed in the Messiah, and he was crucified by Rome, and if you're crucified by Rome, you can't be the Messiah. And so they lost their jobs, and they were destitute. And so Paul went around to the churches that he had planted in the Mediterranean Rim, and he started saying, hey, the Christians in Jerusalem need your help, and so we're going to take up an offering, and all of this offering is going to go to help them, to provide for them, to put food on the table for them, because they can't provide for themselves right now. And he went to the city of Corinth, and when he told them the plan, Corinth was in a booming economy. They were a port city. They had all kinds of commerce coming in and out of the city, and so their economy was way up. And when they heard about the need in Jerusalem, they said, yes, we're going to do it. We're going to give big. We're going to give big. And in fact, they gave a good chunk of money up front and said, hey, this is what we're going to give now, but when you come back, we'll give more. And so Paul said, this is awesome. And then a month went by, and 2 months went by, and time went by, and he didn't hear anything else from the church in Corinth. And they just didn't give any more money. And Paul was concerned about that, and so he wrote them in a letter, and he said these words. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1, it says this. And now, and he's talking to the church in Corinth, and now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace. Now, you watch this word as we go through this text. We want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. Macedonia was another area that wasn't too far from Corinth in that part of the world. And when Rome came in and conquered that area, it was a very wealthy area because Macedonia was known for its gold mines and its silver mines. And when Rome came in and conquered that area, guess what they did with the gold and the silver? They took it all. And overnight, as a result of that, the economy in the Macedonian area completely collapsed because Rome came in and took all of the wealth for themselves. They funded their armies and they got rich on themselves. But the people of Macedonia were destitute because of that. And so Paul points to the Macedonians who were destitute. And he says this, we want you to know about these churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, they're overflowing joy. Now, how in the world can you be overflowing with joy when you have been wiped out financially and there's no end in sight to that? But their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in what? Rich generosity. Verse 3 says, for I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and they even beyond their ability, and even beyond their ability. In other words, they gave what they didn't have to give. In fact, Paul didn't ask them to give. But when they heard about the need that was in Jerusalem, their hearts, because of the grace of God, their hearts went out to those people, and they pleaded with Paul that they could give. It says this in the next sentence, entirely on their own. In other words, I didn't have anything to do with it. I didn't even ask them. They urgently They wouldn't let up on this. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege. This wasn't a burden. This was a privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. Paul, can we please give? No. You've got your own problems. You don't have to worry about it. No. Really, we want to help, Paul. Would you please? And I'm so glad their spirit has gone on to the American church today, that congregations all over America are saying, please let us give. Please let us. Anyway, but that's what was happening in the church of Macedonia. And they exceeded our expectations. They gave of themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God to us also. And Paul goes on and says this: so we urge Titus, just as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace, there's that word again, this act of grace on your part. That in some way an act of generosity was fueled by grace. And then he says in verse 7, but since you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love we have kindled in you, see to it that you also excel in this what? Grace of giving. There it is again. And I read that phrase, and Paul's saying, you ought to look at the Macedonians. You guys are wealthy. They're not. They're destitute, and yet they're pleading with us for the opportunity, for the privilege of giving. And so what I want you to do is, you excel in all these other things. I want you, because of your wealth, I want you to also excel in this grace of giving. The grace of giving. It's an interesting thing, because right after the church was launched, Peter and John were thrown into prison, and they thought they were going to get beheaded, and then they were released. And they went back to the church, and they had a prayer meeting, and they prayed for boldness. And after that, and again, the church was entering into that season of persecution where people were losing jobs and things weren't going so well. And this is what it says in Acts chapter 4, verse 33. It says this: with great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ. So everywhere they went, they talked about the risen Christ. They talked about, hey, we saw him, he was crucified, he was buried, he came back to life, and we are witnesses of these things. And there are hundreds of people in Jerusalem that were, and so that's what they focused their time on. And then it says this, and watch this, and God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all. What's the result of God's grace that's powerfully at work in them all? Well, he says that there were no needy persons among them. Now think about that just for a second. That God's grace came rushing in their lives through the crucifixion of Jesus, through the sacrifice of Jesus. They had been forgiven of their sins. Their eternity was secure, and God had washed all things out of their past, they were secure by God's love through the sacrifice of Jesus. And that grace, when they understood what that grace, it motivated something in them. And it wasn't just to say thank you to God. There was something else entirely. That grace that they had received motivated them to take care of those around them. It motivated their generosity. It motivated their willingness to say, you know what, we've got to help. It's an amazing thought that when we fully understand God's grace, it has an effect on us. And that effect is generosity. Christian people, followers of Jesus, since the early days of the church, have been the most generous people on the planet. Why is that? Because of the grace of God in our lives. In fact, following Jesus goes hand in hand with a generous life. Because God's grace penetrates our heart and it opens our eyes to the needs that are around us. Listen to what it says of the early Christians. It says this: for from time to time, those who owned land or houses, and not very many people had land or houses. A lot of people rented out, but they didn't have a lot of wealth. Those who owned land or houses sold them and brought the money from the sales and put it at the apostles' feet. And the apostles got rich, didn't they? No. They turned around and took that money, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. The people who were in need around them, got the dividends of the generosity of God's people because of God's grace in their lives. And this is what we're calling ourselves to in this season right now as we stand here today as a church, is that we absorb the grace of God and that it motivates generosity in us. And this really is the bottom line for today. God's grace to us results in generosity through us. God's grace to us results in generosity through us. Say that with me. Read it out loud with me. God's grace to us results in generosity through us. And now take the us out, put me in there. God's grace to me results in generosity through me. This has been the characteristic of Christians, of followers of Jesus from the very beginning. That the grace of God is transformative in our lives, and one of the ways that we see the transformation of God's grace is that we become generous to those around us. His generosity, His grace flows through us. Which brings me back to our generosity initiative. That between now and the end of the year, we want to raise $200,000 above our normal giving. For what purpose? We're doing fine financially. We've spent less money than we've taken in. There's no, this is not for us. We're going to give every penny of this away. Would you like to know where we're going to give it to? All right, here we go. This is the fun part. Are you ready? Here we go. We're going to focus on three things: international, national, and local. International, national, and local. Back a couple of months ago, I had the opportunity to go on a vision trip with one of our guys on our staff here, Steve Franklin. He's our director of operation, and we went to Brazil. And we went on a vision trip with two organizations, one that you're probably familiar with, the other probably not. The one that you're not familiar with is called Stadia Church Planting Group. And Stadia plants churches all over the United States, and they plant churches in other countries as well. And 8 years ago, they partnered with a familiar organization that you're probably aware of, Compassion International. Compassion International works through the local church to help kids out of poverty all across the world. Stadia's vision and heart for church planting is they want to plant churches that reach children with the gospel. They do that in America, and yet they struggle with that in other parts of the world. And so they got together with Compassion because Compassion is all about kids. And Stadia is about planting churches that reach kids. And so 8 years ago, they got together and they formed this alliance where they started planting churches in the poorest areas of the world. And in the last 8 years, they've planted 200 churches for kids. Now, a little fact about church planting. In America, when someone plants a church, within 5 years, 70% of churches that are planted fail. They go out of business. They close their doors. 70%. So if we planted 10 churches in the city of Richmond, within 5 years, only 3 of them would still exist. In the last 8 years, since Stadia and Compassion have been planting churches together in other countries, guess how many of their churches are still thriving today? 100% of them. 100%. In the poorest areas of our world. And this is what Stadia has done. Compassion vets the churches. They vet the pastors. It's a 2-year process. And so Compassion goes out, they're on the ground, and they find pastors and they find churches that are good leaders. They're good churches. There are a lot of different things that they have to have. But one of the things they have to have is they have to have deeded property. They have to have legally deeded property in their name. The other thing that they have to have Stadia come in and help is that they have to have already 200 children in their church. When those requirements and others are made, then churches like us provide through Stadia a grant for this church to build a campus, a facility. These churches are meeting in nooks and crannies in the worst conditions. And if left on their own, it would take them another 10 to 15 years to have adequate facilities to reach more kids for Jesus and to help lift kids out of poverty all around the world. But with churches like ours, for the low, low price of $87,000, we can plant a church. And from the time that grant is given, 12 months later, that church has a fully operational campus. One of the churches that we visited started in a house. There. You can't see it, but there's a front porch. It's kind of dark in there. And then there's an open room over here. And this woman, whose husband is not a Christian, he's an alcoholic, but this next woman that you're going to see on the screen, she started this church for kids. She just started gathering children from the village. By the way, this village has 10,000 people living. It's in the middle of nowhere. There's no economy. There are no jobs out in this area. These people can't move away. There's no running water. There's none of that. But she loves Jesus, and she wants to see kids come to Jesus. And so she started this church in her house. And the next slide, you'll see her daughter is there. And she married this man, and guess what he is? He's a pastor. And they outgrew her little house, and they started renting little nooks and crannies in this thing for years and years. For 8 years, they're having 200 kids slammed in this place, and they have no money because nobody has money there. And so Stadia teamed up with a church out of Chicago, and 12 months after the grant was given, they built this campus. There's a wall all around this campus. I've got many other pictures, but this is an open pavilion. It's very, very large. You could probably fit 500 people in this. Behind all of this is where the classrooms are. They've got like 8 or 10 classrooms. They've got running water. They drilled way, way deep to hit water, and they've got water there because there's no running water. No one has. So they have running water on this place. And they have showers, and they have toilets, and they have, fountains. They've got a kitchen and a cafeteria there where these kids. Now, when they opened this thing up, they had 196 kids is what they had before they opened up. Within 2 months of opening this campus up, they were reaching 500 children just because they had a place. That's not including parents. That's not including aunts and uncles. And so here's a village of 10,000 people who can't, if they wanted to move to the city, they had no opportunity to even move out of that poverty. And yet, Compassion and Stadia go into this place, and they bring the light and the hope of the gospel right there. And they're educating these kids on how to build things and manners and values and all kinds of things. And it's lifting these families out of poverty. It's lifting these families up in the name of Jesus, and the hope of the gospel is coming here. This is what we want to do January 1. We want at the end of the year to write a grant to a church in Brazil to start so that by the end of next year, by the end of 2019, they'll open a campus, something like this, where they can reach hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids. Here's another picture of some of these kids. They came, these are poor children. This looks like a private school. But because of the generosity of Christians helping, saying, this is what we're going to do. Here's another shot of the kids at the cafeteria. Beautiful kids with hope. Here's another shot of an ugly guy. There, right there. That's a fun one. We just had so much time. But this is what we want to do. We want to plant a church with Stadia for $87,000. That's our international plant. Are you excited about that? I'm excited about that. Look, we've got a church. We've got about 500 kids in our church. For $87,000, we can reach 500 kids. That's what we're going to do, and I'm excited about this. So that's international. National, we're going to focus, and we're going to give $62,500 away to help with disaster relief. We've had actually more than that, but we're going to focus on 2 major disasters, Hurricane Michael that hit Florida and the California fires. I have a pastor friend who is in Florida, and when the Hurricane Michael hit, it went ashore, and he's 60 miles north of where it went ashore, and that hurricane went right between 2 of their campuses. In one of the areas, there's a small regional airport. They clocked winds over 200 miles an hour. It destroyed everything. My friend stayed because he's lived in Florida all of his life, and he thought, oh, it's just another one of those things. And they stayed. In the middle of the night, he told his wife, we were stupid for staying here. We were stupid for staying here. He said, James, when I came out the next morning, he said, right across the street from where I live, there are 6,000 acres of timber. 6,000 acres of timber. When I walked out the next day, I could see for miles and miles and miles. This was across the street from his house. Here's another shot of some of the destruction. There's a road it's just shut down. They can't, power lines are everywhere. This was everywhere. This was everywhere. Here's another shot of power lines, or people were locked in. He said, when I came out, now I'm going to show you a little clip of the conversation I had with him. He says in this conversation, he misspoke, and I know that because he told me. His driveway, he says, is 100 to 150 yards long. It's not. It's 100 and 150 feet long. This is what he says about the devastation when he walked out the next morning.
Nobody could get out of their houses. It took me, my driveway, maybe 150 yards, maybe, with 2 chainsaws and a Kubota tractor with a bucket on it. Luckily, I have one of those parked behind my house, and so it's like, it took about 5 hours to get our driveway just to drivable. Luckily, our house had just basically cosmetic damage, but man, the amount of timber that was down, and then so we got out and just started looking at houses that were devastated and destroyed. And yeah, I mean, when they closed down Interstate 10 for 80 miles because there was so much debris on the interstate, Highway 90, which is a 4-lane highway. I was going to our Mariana campus after the storm, and it basically, you had to weave in and out of debris. It pretty much was a one-way path. So that morning I began to realize, we're in a whole different world. It's not the same.
Those disasters were in the news nonstop, around the clock, for a couple weeks. And then they're gone. And see, people like us, we think, oh, their lives are back to normal. But they're not. They're not. They're still suffering. They're still suffering. This is what Paul says about the media coverage and kind of helping us understand what they're still going through. Listen to what he says.
Here's the thing about these storms, and even like now with the fire that's going on out in California, these things get about a 10 or 15 day window in the news media, and then they move on to something else. But the reality is, most of the time, you're really 30 days in before you even understand the reality. And so by the time, this is what we're learning, and we're trying to take lessons from this as an organization. By the time it's off of our radar, the events that happen around us, that's when the people who are dealing with it are just experiencing the reality of it. And so the full reality of it, because at that point in time, man, you're really starting to uncover and unpack what really it is.
Paul said that the disaster relief agencies come in and they try to have an estimation for how long it's going to take for people to get back on their feet. And they start with, there are 3 phases. The first phase is search and rescue, where they go out and they just try to rescue people. They search for people. They try to find everybody after the disaster has happened. And however long that is, they take that times 10. So in Paul's case, in their case, it was 10 days of search and rescue. And then they take that times 10, which means that they have 100 days of cleanup. It's going to take them 3.5 months to clean up, just to get all the stuff, the debris out. Various agencies, that's just what it takes. So they're looking at, this happened, several weeks ago, but they're not even halfway through the cleanup phase. They're still using chainsaws and trying to get, trees out. And then you take that 100 days times 10 again, which in their case is 1,000 days to rebuild. So they're looking at over 3 years to actually get back to a sense of normalcy in their area. And we've had it for 15, days on the, on the news cycle, and then we just go on. Their lives are completely upended. Fortunately, because one of their campuses was not hurt very badly, they used it as a staging area for all these disaster relief organizations that came in, Convoy of Hope, and they just used it for staging. And so people from the area, when they could get there, when the roads became passable, this was an area where they could come and get a hot meal and get some supplies. In the back of their building, they kind of have a warehouse space that's unfinished, and they've used that as a staging area to disseminate all kinds of supplies. And so Convoy of Hope, which is a great organization, they're in California right now, they're in Florida right now, they're going to be there for a while. Another organization, the Mennonite Disaster Relief, and Paul's church came out of the Mennonite group of churches. And the Mennonites, they came and they helped, but they're going to take this warehouse space after all this is out, and they're going to start building little rooms and apartments and plumbing and bathrooms and showers, because they're going to be there for the next 2 years as they try to rebuild their community. And so when people and groups come, they're going to have a place to sleep and to work out of. And that's what they're going to do. And then I asked Paul, I said, Paul, if you could say anything to our church, what would you say? And this is what Paul said.
I think, James, the thing that I would say to your whole church is if you could be praying not just for this moment in time, but praying for a season of saying, God, give them the wisdom to see this in a much broader context so they can see as you see, and then the strength to do as you say every day. Because every day, that's what we need. We need wisdom and we need strength. I think the other thing would be to decide, ways to come alongside would be either through sending like gift cards, sending teams, being involved in that way is another way that I think you guys really could come alongside our organization and help strengthen us. And also it would encourage, every team that comes in is such an encouragement to not only our church, but the community that they touch.
I saw Paul last week in Atlanta. We were at some meetings together, and I told him, I said, hey, we're going to stand with you in this. And in the coming year, not after the first of the year, we'll send teams down. The thing he said about the gift cards, the Visa gift cards. So if you get a Visa gift card, which I'm encouraging you to do, buy them in 50s and 100, quantities of $50 and $100. He said, because what happens is it helps people with their dignity. Instead of going to a semi-bed to get supplies or whatever, they can walk into Walmart and buy what they need, and it gives them a sense of dignity. And not only that, is that $100, when we give them a $100 Visa gift card and they go in and they spend that $100, the relief organizations say that money multiplies 5 to 7 times when it's spent on their local economy, because when the store gets it, then they pay their employees go out and buy other things, and when they buy things, it helps that, and so it multiplies. So that $100 gift card is really like $500 to $700 in there. And if you give $1,000, it becomes $5,000 or $7,000 to the economy of that, and it helps people get back on their feet. And so I want you to start buying Visa gift cards, and we'll collect those, and we'll send as much of those as we can, because they're going to need them, not just for the next couple of weeks, they're going to need them for the next couple of months, because people have been displaced. They don't have jobs. Some of the businesses are back up, some of them aren't, and they need help. And then there's the California fires, and you've watched this more recently, where it's just a living hell. Here's another shot of a fireman. Houses are being just completely torched. And then after it's all over, this is what it looks like. Just whole areas completely incinerated. Nothing. Nothing left to salvage. All you have to go back to your home is just a pile of rubble. And you look around, and it's just over. And there are thousands of people, some still missing, 88 dead the last I saw, hundreds still missing. And these people are right in the middle of, oh my goodness, it's just been completely annihilated. They need our help. Not just Christians, but people. And so what we want to do is we want to partner with local churches who are on the ground, and they've been personally affected, but they are the hands and feet of Jesus. And so we want to help them financially to say, here's money, here's help. Any way that it can be used in the name of Jesus, please use it. Because you know what? You have a house, I have a house. You have an apartment, I have an apartment. We have things. We haven't been completely obliterated, incinerated. And so we're going to come along churches in California to help. So we're going to give $62,500 to disaster relief in our nation. And then that leads us to local. We're going to give $50,500 to some RVA ministry partners. And here are some of the partners that we're going to be helping out. Feed More. Do you realize that in the RVA area, in the Richmond metropolitan area, that 1 in 7 people struggle with food insecurity? Think about that. 1 in 7 people have food insecurity. And this money that we're going to be, raising over the next month will enable us, catch this, will enable us as a single congregation to provide 100,000 meals to people in our community. That's a lot. That's a big deal, people. That's an amazing thing. And then we want to partner with an organization called Mercy Mall. Mercy Mall is a place where everything they have is free, but when people are, they've been burned out of their house, or they're the victim of domestic violence, or they get out of jail or prison and they have no place to go and they have nothing, they can go to Mercy Mall and receive the things and the supplies that they need to be helped. We want to partner with the Pregnancy Resource Center, who this year already have served over 1,100 women. And every service that they provide is free. Free ultrasounds, free pregnancy tests, free sexually transmitted disease tests, STD tests. These are women who are scared and nervous, and they are hanging on to hope. And the Pregnancy Resource Center gives hope, and they walk with these young women. And we want to come, and we want to help them. The other organization that we're going to partner with is the Richmond Justice Initiative. Anybody heard of that organization, the Richmond Justice Initiative, or the RJI? Anybody? Yeah, just a handful. Well, the Richmond Justice Initiative is a nonprofit, faith-based organization that works to eradicate human trafficking through education, equipping communities with not only awareness, but ways to take action to affect change. There's slavery. There's sex slavery in our nation. Within the United States, experts estimate that over 100,000 children are trafficked every year. And according to the FBI, 80% of those children who are trafficked in the United States of America, 80% of them are United States citizens. They're our boys and girls. They're not bringing them in from outside of the country. They're already here. They're picking these kids up off the street and selling them into sex slavery. Right here. And what is shocking about what I'm going to tell you next, it blew my mind. When I found this out, I said, this cannot be. This cannot be. Richmond is ranked in the top 20 most prolific cities in the United States for trafficking. Right here in our backyard. This is a real issue. And we want to help the RJI get into public schools and to help kids know, here's what you need to guard against. Here's how you need to protect. But you know what? They need our help with that. And so we're going to come alongside them, because these are our sons and daughters. These are our boys and girls in the city of Richmond, in the top 20 trafficking cities in the United States. That's unacceptable. We must do something about this. And we are. We are. We're raising awareness. I'm telling you, you just learned something you had no idea about. And I'm thankful for RJI and the work that they're doing in our city, in our community, in our counties. These evil people need to be put out of business and put into jail. And so, we're raising a lot of money for a lot of things that are right now. Bottom line, again, God's grace to us results in generosity through us. God's grace to us results in generosity through us. And so we have this initiative, this generosity initiative, where we're trying to raise $200,000 above our normal giving. We're going to give every dime of it away. There's no administrative fees. There's none of that. We're giving every dime of it away. So how do you give? Glad you asked that question. You can text Journey RVA to 77977. You want to give on your mobile device, you can give any amount. You can give Journey RVA 77977. When you get to that page, when you give via your text, or when you give via our website, which is journeyrva.com, either way, there's two lines that you can give to. You can give to the general fund, or you can give to the 2018 Generosity Initiative. And the Generosity Initiative is what we've talked about today. So you can give just directly. You can say, I want my money going to that. And that's how you can give online, or to Journey, texting Journey RVA 77977, or you can give it here and just mark it on your check. You can give stock gifts or bonds or property. There are people who have property. They can sell it like the early Christians did and say, you know what, I want the sale of that property to rescue boys and girls out of trafficking. I want to sell this property so that boys and girls, hundreds of them in other parts of the world that are poor, that don't have the light of the gospel or the hope of the gospel, to know that. I want to help men and women in our own nation that have been wiped out. It's worth it. It's worth it. And so you can give stocks, you can go on online, and there's a whole way to do that. And some employers match gifts to charities. Guess what we are? A charity. It wasn't a trick question. So you say, hey, you know what? I want to give something. You need to check if your company, your organization matches charitable giving. And then we can raise. Look, we have to do this because of the grace of God. Someday, God forbid, we may be in a situation where fires have swept through us and we have nothing. And you know what we're going to want in that moment in time? We're going to want churches just like us somewhere else in the country to say, we will show up and help. We will give, we will support you, we will help you be the hands and feet of Jesus. If your son or daughter were abducted into trafficking, you know what you'd want? You'd want an organization like the RJI or the whatever it is. I forget the initials here. But you would want that organization saying, no, we have to come together as a community and stop this. And so this is our time to unleash generosity, to unleash compassion in the world, in our nation, and in our community. I want you to be praying for these churches in Florida and in California. Paul said, hey, number one thing, pray, because it's a devastating thing, and we need God's wisdom and grace in these moments. So pray, not just today, but for a season. And over these next 30 days, we need to give. And it's not about us. It's not about Journey. We're fine. We're trying to raise this money to give to those who are in need, because the people of Jesus, the followers of Jesus, have always been the most generous people on the planet because they understand the grace of God in their own life. Let me pray for you. Father, thank you for this opportunity that we have to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to be the resource for people who need resources, God. And I pray that you would help us open up our hearts first to you, and then open up our resources to help those who are in desperate need. Father, would you be honored in the season of generosity in our church? And I pray that other churches across the nation and across the world are having the same conversation that we're having today to help those in need. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.